been too long. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Senator Lugar, members of the committee. Indeed, I do join in welcoming your newest member and also acknowledging my fellow Tennessean, Senator Corker, and the many friends that I have on this committee. And may I also acknowledge in the audience Teresa Heinz-Carey, who is a longtime activist on the issue that we're discussing here today. It is truly a great honor and personal privilege to be invited to appear before this committee. Mr. Chairman, I want to compliment you on your longtime leadership on this issue, and thank you and Senator Lugar for the prominence you're bringing to this issue by making it the subject of the very first substantive hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in 2009. We are here today, of course, to talk about how we as Americans and how the United States of America as part of the global community should address the dangerous and growing threat of the climate crisis. We have arrived at a moment of decision. Our home, Earth, is in danger. What is at risk of being destroyed is not the planet itself, of course, but the conditions that have made it hospitable for human beings. Moreover, we must face up to this urgent and unprecedented threat to the existence of our civilization at a time when our nation must simultaneously solve two other worsening crises. Our economy is in its deepest recession since the 1930s, and our national security is endangered by a vicious terrorist network and the complex challenge of ending the war in Iraq honorably while winning the military and political struggle in Afghanistan. As we search for solutions to all three of these challenges, it is becoming ever clearer that they are linked by a common thread: our dangerous over-reliance on carbon-based fuels. If you grab a hold of that thread and pull it, all three of these crises yield a solution, and you hold in your hand the answer, and that is a shift from carbon-based fuels to renewable energy. As long as we continue to send hundreds of billions of dollars for foreign oil year after year to the most dangerous and unstable regions of the world, our national security will continue to be at risk. As long as we continue to allow our economy to remain shackled to the OPEC roller coaster of rising and falling oil prices, our jobs and our way of life will remain at risk. Moreover, as the demand for oil worldwide grows rapidly over the longer term, even as the rate of new discoveries is falling, it is increasingly obvious that this roller coaster is headed for a crash, and we're in the front car. Most importantly, as long as we continue to depend on dirty fossil fuels like coal and oil to meet our energy needs and dump 70 million tons of global warming pollution into the thin shell of atmosphere surrounding our planet, we move closer and closer to several dangerous tipping points which scientists have repeatedly warned, again just yesterday, threaten to make it impossible for us to avoid irretrievable destruction of the conditions that make human civilization possible on this planet. We're borrowing money from China to buy oil from the Persian Gulf and doing it in ways that destroy the planet. Every bit of that has to change. For years, our efforts to address the growing climate crisis have been undermined by the idea that we must choose between our planet and our way of life, between our moral duty and our economic well-being. These are false choices. In fact, the solutions to the climate crisis are the very same solutions that will address our economic and national security crises as well. In order to repower our economy, restore American economic and moral leadership in the world, and regain control of our own destiny, we must take bold action now. The first step is already before us. I urge this Congress to quickly pass the entirety of President Obama's recovery package. The plan's unprecedented and critical investments in four key areas: energy efficiency, renewables, a unified national energy smart grid, and the move to clean cars, represent an important down payment and are long overdue. These crucial investments will create millions of new jobs and hasten our economic recovery while strengthening our national security and beginning to solve the climate crisis. Quickly building our capacity to generate clean electricity will lay the groundwork for the next major step needed, placing a price on carbon. If Congress acts right away to pass President Obama's recovery package and then takes decisive action this year to institute a cap-and-trade system for CO2 emissions, as many of our states and many other countries have already done, and as many of the leading Fortune 500 corporations in America are pleading with the Congress to do, so they'll have predictability and the basis to become more competitive in world commerce, then the United States will regain its credibility and enter the Copenhagen Treaty talks with a renewed authority to lead the world in shaping a fair and effective treaty. And this treaty must be negotiated this year, not next year, this year. A fair, effective, and balanced treaty will put in place the global architecture that will place the world at long last and in the nick of time on a path towards solving the climate crisis and securing the future of human civilization. I am hopeful that this can be achieved. Let me outline for you the basis for the hope and optimism that I feel. The Obama administration has already signaled a strong willingness to regain U.S. leadership on the global stage in the treaty talks, reversing years of inaction. This is critical to success in Copenhagen and is clearly a top priority of the administration. Developing countries, as you said, Mr. Chairman, that were once reluctant to join in the first phases of a global response to the climate crisis have themselves now become leaders in demanding action and in taking bold steps on their own initiatives. Brazil has proposed a very impressive new plan to halt the destructive deforestation in that nation. Indonesia has emerged as a new constructive force in the talks, and China's leaders have gained a strong understanding of the need for action and have already begun important new initiatives. Heads of state from around the world have begun to personally engage on this issue, and forward-thinking corporate leaders have made this a top priority. More and more Americans are paying attention to the new evidence and fresh warnings from scientists. There is a much broader consensus on the need for action than there was when President George H.W. Bush negotiated and the Senate ratified the Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992, and there is much stronger support for action than when we completed the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. The elements that I believe are key to a successful agreement in Copenhagen include, first, strong targets and timetables from industrialized countries and differentiated but binding commitments from developing countries that put the entire world under a system with one commitment to reduce emissions of carbon dioxide and other global warming pollutants that are the cause of the climate crisis. Two, the inclusion of deforestation, which alone accounts for more than 20% of the emissions that cause global warming. Three, the addition of so-called carbon sinks, including those from soils, principally from farmlands and grazing lands, with appropriate methodologies and accounting. Farmers, such as Senator Lugar, and ranchers in the U.S. and around the world need to know that they can be a part of the solution. Fourth, the assurance that developing countries will have access to mechanisms and resources that will help them adapt to the worst impacts of the climate crisis and technologies to solve the problem. And finally, a strong compliance and verification regime. The road to Copenhagen is not easy, but we have traversed this ground before. We negotiated the Montreal Protocol more than 20 years ago to protect the ozone layer and then strengthened it to the point where we've now banned most of the major substances that created the ozone hole over Antarctica, and that is now healing. And we did it with bipartisan support. President Ronald Reagan